All right, Larry, we had a little last-minute technical glitch there, but I believe we are good to go here. And this is a very important episode. I feel like I say that frequently, but Larry, you know, every time you come on the show, we're covering really important topics about justice, liberty, the state of our nation, and things that I know are important to the viewers of Crowdsource the Truth. And things that certain people maybe don't want people to hear about, but here we go. Okay, welcome, Larry. How are you?
Good, Jason. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I believe we are live and everything should be copacetic. Let me just make sure that's the case. So, Larry, we're going to be talking today about a number of different issues that have arisen. Now, you've brought a lawsuit against Twitter, Google, Facebook, who else?
Instagram, Apple, and of course Google's YouTube. So
right.
All of that.
Right.
It's a class action lawsuit.
Right. And the reason you chose to do it against all of them was because it's quite clear that the protection of these social media companies under this Decency and Communications Act, Section 230, is designed originally in 1996 to protect internet service providers and companies like AT&T and Verizon that are passively operating these networks that can't and don't edit the content that users send over those networks. And like it or not, the social media companies have successfully hidden behind that and basically knocked out any kind of First Amendment suits that have come up. So as I understand it, your strategy has focused on the anti-competitive practices that these companies engage in, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the suit?
Right. You know, as I usually say, let me just back up just a little bit here. Because a number of years ago, about 6 years ago, I brought a lawsuit in my own name against Facebook because Facebook was allowing to remain on Facebook the third Intifada page. These were Palestinians, radical Muslims who were threatening to kill Jews and Christians. And they were using that, Facebook, to whip up this violence. In fact, some people died. Now, as you know, we had a whole show last time with Laura Loomer. It's now up to about 65,000 views just on my website. It must be a whole lot more on yours.
Actually, it's doing better on Freedom Watch, but that's okay. More people need to see that information.
Right. Well, it pushes to crowdsource the truth. And anyway, we need to get it out. We're a good team, Jason. And anyway, I brought that case. And I brought it in front of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. And what you're saying is accurate. That court dismissed the case based upon this Communications Decency Act that really protects these internet providers. I then took it up to the appellate court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. They affirmed that ruling, and I then tried to take it up to the Supreme Court. And I pointed out many of the same things that Congressman Nunes has pointed out in his complaint that he filed yesterday. In fact, it was stronger than Nunes's complaint because I was talking about assault. They were threatening me. As you know, I'm a big supporter of Israel. I'm a Zionist. I'm Messianic. I'm Jewish. And I took it as a threat to me. I'm way out there. I've gotten threats from Muslims and terrorists before. I had security at Judicial Watch, and I now stay, you know, pretty low profile in terms of letting people know where I am for that reason. So I had a real basis for doing that, and I did not succeed at that. So when it came to bring a case in the last several months against these internet providers, again, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Apple, I came up with a creative method. As you know, Jason, I'm an alumnus of the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice. I helped break up AT&T during the administration of Ronald Reagan. So I crafted a clever complaint that I believe will get around this prohibition under this law. And what I maintained is that these internet companies were colluding, they were conspiring, they were acting in concert to squash conservative talk, to keep us off the internet, keep us from educating the American public, that if they didn't have an actual agreement, which I allege they do have, I'm sure they do. First of all of the owners of these companies are highly leftist. They're from Silicon Valley. They have a political agenda. We've seen some of that on TV, their reaction after Hillary Clinton won.
Yeah.
But these actions are
Lost,
occurring.
you mean?
Yeah, lost. Excuse me. Well, she actually won in many ways. We can see that right now, unfortunately, because the country's being dragged down the drain as a result of it, and that's what she wanted. But that's being a little bit facetious. But the fact here is that they're acting in parallel too, and there's an antitrust doctrine that conscious parallelism can give rise to restraints of trade, whether it's price fixing, market division, and things like that. So I brought this case, and it's a class action, and later Laura Loomer joined it because she was banned from Twitter. As far as what was happening to me, this is one example on Google, YouTube, I had been staying static or declining in terms of our subscription on YouTube for many, many months in 2018. And then we started to even decline. We went from 70,000 all the way down to 30,000 subscribers. It was clear that they were discriminating against me. And the collusion was also happening elsewhere on Facebook, and other places. So I brought this lawsuit, and I thought that by the grace of God, the case wound up being randomly assigned to a new Trump appointee, Trevor McFadden. I figured, well, maybe he'll give it a fair shake. Anyway, it sat around for several months, and just last Friday, and you can see the article on our website at freedomwatchusa.org, which links our complaint and it links the finding of the judge, is that he dismissed the complaint, not with prejudice. I'm going to refile it as a new complaint. And what he said there was very disingenuous. He said,
let me pause you for a second, Larry, because I think a lot of our viewers are lay people and don't know what it means to dismiss it with prejudice, without prejudice.
Yeah, it means it's not dismissed for all time. It means that it can be refiled. That's what it means. It means that he looked at that complaint. He didn't think that complaint was sufficient. Now, the judge is hoping that I go away. He doesn't want the hot potato in his courtroom because this was one of his findings, and you can see it at our website at freedomwatchusa.org. He says that, and he's citing Supreme Court precedent in another case that has nothing to do factually with this case, and he's saying that if the claims that you're alleging are not plausible, the judge can take those claims away from the jury and dismiss the case himself. And then he goes on to say that our allegations were not specific enough, and they were very specific. We put in market shares. We not only sued for restraint of trade under Sherman 1 of the antitrust laws, but also Sherman 2, monopolization, because these companies together constitute an oligopoly. They're monopolizing the industry. That means the concentration is very heavy. We had a lot of specific information here, not just about me, not just about Freedom Watch, not just about Laura Loomer, but about other conservatives that have been discriminated against, like Prager University and others. And it was just basically a cop-out by the judge. And this is what you see these days, is that these judges don't want a hot potato in their courtroom. These are very powerful corporate interests that basically line the pockets of politicians. Judges want to get appointed to a higher post, say in the appellate court or Supreme Court. You don't want to ruffle too many feathers. And then, of course, things appear on these websites that talk about these judges. So they don't want to be criticized. They want these websites to take things down. And I'm not saying that Judge McFadden's a bad man. What I'm saying here is that he's a sissy, okay, for lack of a better word.
Oops.
Or could we say a panty waste? Okay, whatever you want to say. That's what he is. No disrespect to women, believe me, because he can be a man and be a panty waste. But it was too hot for him to handle. I see this time in and time out. And I said in this article, I said, Trump is taking really bad advice these days, not just with regard to his lawyers, but the people that are recommending the appointment of judges to him. I mean, these are establishment Republicans that are like Matt Schlapp of the American Conservative Union, otherwise known as CPAC. They put that event on each year, or the Federalist Society. These are Washington insiders, people a lot like, God forbid, Kellyanne Conway's husband, George, whatever the heck his name is. Remember his name? George Conway.
Yeah.
And they're insiders here, okay? And that's the reason that you don't get these very courageous judges on the bench. So we're going to refile the case, and we're going to maybe I'll file it in a different jurisdiction. We hope that we get a better judge, but it's a creative case which gets you around this communications decency law, which basically is an absolute bar. And Nunes, I think it's good that he filed the complaint, but it's not likely to succeed the way it's structured. And I believe that it was filed more for public relations. And of course, Fox picks up on that. Hannity, touts that and company. He never talks about anything that we do because, as my client Laurie Lund said in the radio show last week, you can see that at freedomwatchusa.org, is that Fox has blacklisted certain conservatives, many of my clients, yours truly, because I represented a woman that was defamed at Fox a number of years ago. Roger Ailes retaliated, and the current head of Fox, Suzanne Scott, who was a clone, a yes man of Ailes, continues the policies over there. But Fox is, self-destructing as we speak. We can talk about that later if you'd like. But in any event, our case is much more significant than Nunes's, although I'm glad the guy filed it.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions, Larry, because this DCA 230 is a big thing. And I mean, again, in my view, when I see that Decency and Communications Act, Section 230, it very clearly seems to be written to protect Verizon, AT&T, Time Warner, Cox, Spectrum, companies that are strictly running and maintaining a network. At no time does, AT&T get on the phone call and say, like, I can't call up AT&T and say, hey, I just had a crappy phone call with Larry, or Larry said this or that I think is, anti this or anti that. And AT&T doesn't call you and terminate your phone number and cancel your phone service with them. They don't do that. They don't act in that way. They have no mechanism for acting in that way. And so if somebody plans a bank robbery over AT&T phones, the bank can't come sue AT&T because they had no idea what was going on the phones. There's a fundamental difference between that and what Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and all these companies do, because they preside over the content. They have mechanisms for reporting content. They develop guidelines that operate outside the laws of the United States, and they can allow or disallow your use of their social media software based on your performance in accordance with their rules, which, as private companies, the rules can be arbitrary. They can decide if they dislike Jewish people and like Muslim people, or dislike Muslim people and like Jewish people. If you say, I'm anti-termite, that's okay. If you say Ilhan Omar married her brother and is an undercover jihadi trying to install an Islamic caliphate in North America by infiltrating Congress, that's no good and you get kicked off. So my issue is, why can't we fundamentally change and update this Decency and Communications Act so that it says, if you're going to curate the content, if you're going to be an editor of the content and ultimately have the decision over what is published and what is not, you're much more like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, a publisher of content, than you are like AT&T or Verizon, merely a network upon which content travels. Why can't that be done?
It should be done, but the problem is these companies are extremely rich. They're powerful. They have lobbyists in Washington, D.C., Democrat and Republican. And, the Democrats and Republicans basically just bow down to them. That's a fact. So you can see these Republicans screaming to high heaven, at these hearings. But when push comes to shove, when they had control of Congress, Paul Ryan, believe it or not, who sold the president out, who now sits on the board of directors of Fox as of 2 days ago. In fact, Donald Jr. tweeted out today, ironically, taking a shot at Ryan, says, who's next? Senator Cochran, is he going to be on the board of directors too? Will he be the CEO? Of Tennessee, who hated the president when he was there. But, the reality is that the bribery in Washington is so intense that nothing happens. So what I was basically saying is, I'm glad that Nunes brought this case to raise the profile of it, but he's not going to succeed under the current law. Is that our case, if we get a judge who has some courage, or if we force him into a corner, I mean, if he wants it, you asked for Toyota, I'll put more facts in there if he wants it, but he has to let this case proceed, because when you file a complaint, and this, I'm giving a little bit of a legal course here. When you move to dismiss the case, the court has to take as true everything that the plaintiff says in the complaint and let it go forward if it in fact states a cause of action. At that point, you go to discovery. If this judge thought that we couldn't prove market shares or couldn't prove the things that we were saying about conspiring to collude and restrain trade and to monopolize, that has to await our taking depositions, oral testimony, getting documents, and the such. But the way our society is structured is that the very powerful interests control these judges. They put them on the bench, because how do you get there? Through contributions. Because law firms, labor unions, corporations, they make big contributions. They then tell a U.S. senator who to nominate. They put their yes man up on the bench. You know, they're not yes men. When they're told to say no, they say no.
Right.
And that's who you get on the bench, these establishment judges who don't want to stick their neck out. Now, in my 42-year career, as I've said before, Jason, I've met maybe 5 judges who have any degree of courage. And what I do is litigation full time, you know, in a case that has a political element to it. You know, if you're equal and you're both of the same socioeconomic group or equal in terms of status as a corporation, you may get a fair result, you know, in a case. But if there's this disparity in wealth and power, these judges know who butters their bread. They know who scratches their back. They don't want cases in their courtroom. This same judge, I filed a case for 2 defendants in the after the Klayman Bundy dismissal of the indictment who were acquitted in an earlier trial. The government presented no evidence. The jury just decided to acquit them. They were just thrown in with 18 other defendants, including Klayman and his sons. So I filed a case in the District of Columbia. I think, oh, for the grace of God, it goes to a Trump judge. It goes to this Judge McFadden. And before I could even make an argument, he's transferring the case over to Las Vegas, Nevada, out of D.C., which is exactly the place that we don't want it, because that's where this Judge Gloria Navarro is. She's the chief judge, and there's absolutely no chance of success there. So now I'm refashioning that complaint and going to have to file that one again, too, to have it stick in the District of Columbia. So this is what you're dealing with. He doesn't want stuff in his courtroom. He doesn't want controversy. Someday he hopes to get to the D.C. Circuit, probably. He doesn't want Democrats to block him, and he doesn't want Republicans to block him. And these social media companies have the politicians in their hip pocket.
Wow. Well, see, it's interesting, Larry, because, you know, a lot of our viewers here in the chat share your positive outlook on Devin Nunes. And you know what? I do too. I enjoyed the fact that Devin Nunes was standing up when he was in the, he's still in the House Intelligence Committee, but he was the one who was, you know, going to the White House and meeting with Trump and standing up for President Trump. So I admire that. But this move that's been made with the filing of this lawsuit is so questionable, in my view, that it just calls Devin Nunes's judgment into question, because the approach that they're taking, the lawyer that he's using, none of it makes any sense. And when I look at this Judge Trevor McFadden, I see that he is in Alexandria, Virginia, and of course the lawyer who is representing Devin Nunes is this lawyer Stephen S. Biss, who people who watch Crowdsource the Truth will know. Stephen Biss is also representing Robert David Steele in a defamation lawsuit that he's brought against me that for months I've been saying has no merit, has no value, is a totally frivolous lawsuit. I've entered an anti-SLAPP countersuit against these guys because it's a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And I just wonder, Larry, is it possible that someone, whether it's someone influencing Stephen Biss or someone influencing Devin Nunes, wanted to bring this case in this way to damage the ability of legitimate suits like the one that you're talking about to get anywhere? Would a bad outcome for Devin Nunes hamper your ability to bring other lawsuits against social media companies, or could it?
Well, it wouldn't be good, that's for sure. It's a different theory, okay? But I don't think that Devin Nunes is perfect, by the way. I wasn't, in fact, extolling his virtues. Many months ago, I went to him with evidence of mass surveillance against the American people after Trump was wired.
He did nothing.
He turned a blind eye. He was only interested in what could get him on Fox News, raise money, and make him famous. Okay, that's the way most of them are up there. So I don't have that high a regard for Devin Nunes, although I would say that he did some decent and good things. But his motivations were Devin Nunes, and that's the way most of these people are. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this lawyer who you're talking about, I don't know much about him, but understanding what you tell me about him, he's not exactly Clarence Darrow. I mean, this isn't exactly somebody who's that sharp. But
Right.
and if you look at the complaint, it's written as a press release. I mean, and the actions are not likely to succeed. So when I said that it's good that it's being publicized, it's good to raise the profile of this, because you see, this is the hypocrisy of even the conservative media. If a Devin Nunes brings the case, all of a sudden it's front and center on Fox News, and other places. But if an ordinary citizen like Laura Loomer brings the case, forget it, or if Larry Klayman at Freedom Watch, because we're not a governmental organization, we're a nonprofit, we don't get the same respect that a congressman would get. And, I went through that many times at Judicial Watch, because, they would never, ever, I'd be on TV a lot. I'd be on TV maybe 3 and 4 times a week, sometimes on the same station. But I would never get on a Sunday morning show. They would bring on all these politicians, even on Fox, who basically just lied to the American people and, promoted themselves, but did nothing when they went back to Capitol Hill. And that's the hypocrisy of the media, and it's the hypocrisy, I'd say it's worse than hypocrisy, of congressional representatives. So, I take what you say at your word, Jason. Obviously, this guy, Bliss, is not a good guy, and he probably...
Don't take my word. Don't take my word, Larry. Let's explore it, because my curiosity was piqued that on the exact same day that Fox News was announcing that Donna Brazile would join their lineup, that Paul Ryan was joining their board, they've basically kicked out Judge Jeanine. They now have this story of this $250 million lawsuit against Twitter. Obviously, the demand is huge, $250 million. And when I first saw the report on Fox, they were lauding the 40-page length of the complaint. I obviously have, no legal experience compared to you, but in my experience, it's the content of the document that's important, not the length of it. There can be a lot of...
Martin Luther King would say the content of the document.
Right. I mean, this is a bunch of nonsense here.
What's in it, and you just had a picture of Sean Hannity up there. I can't watch him anymore. I turn it off. I feel like hitting him with a pie,
Well, I think he's made a major mistake, because I think that every other newspaper and, left or right, this thing has been universally maligned as a joke, as a ridiculous lawsuit. I've called Stephen Biss's lawsuit against me on behalf of Robert David Steele a fake lawsuit. Maybe a generous use of words, because, I mean, obviously it's a real suit, but the claims are so worthless. Here's an article from 2008 about Judge William H. Pauley's reaction to Stephen Biss and his involvement in brand aid marketing versus Siberian Enterprises. This was a situation in which Mr. Biss was presiding over an escrow account with, he was basically, Siberian was offering $21 million in cash for brand aid, which had very little cash flow and was more than $5 million in debt. So on the surface, the transaction doesn't seem to make much sense. And the lawyer, Stephen S. Biss, he was assuring brand aid's principals that he held $21 million in escrow, and that turned out to not be the case. This judge threw this case out. William H. Pauley has reprimanded Mr. Biss extensively. Biss lost his license for 1 year and 2 months over this matter. In the range of punitive measures taken against lawyers, how does that stack up?
Well, that's very stiff. All lawyers come into conflict with judges from time to time. I certainly have. That's why I started Judicial Watch. But you don't lie to a judge. I've never lied to a judge. And whatever any judge may say. But this was obviously very severe, and it's something that should be taken into account in assessing this case, Jason. But the point is that, we wish success, but this was basically a public relations stunt. That's what it is. And it's not a serious attack on this social media, which is colluding. Now, if Chairman Nunes, who's no longer chairman, he's now vice chairman, wants to join our case, he's welcome. I mean, join a case that actually might have a chance of success in getting to the Supreme Court. But this one, because of the current law, however unfair, however unjust, however corrupt, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. And of course, Larry, in your profession, there's a term called a pattern and practice. When someone is repeatedly doing something again and again, it's often seen as, sort of their method. And here's an article from 2017 where Stephen Biss, who's pictured right here leaving the courthouse, he was involved in this case, again, a defamation case against Style Weekly. This case was also thrown out. No merit.
Well, that can happen, but from what you're telling me, and I'm going to do some research on this guy isn't exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer.
Yeah,
but
my fear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, cases come and go. Judges make bad decisions. You take them on appeal, but certainly lying to a court and getting caught doing it is not a positive thing.
Yeah, and I mean, again, my fear, of course, is that there might be some intention for this Devin Nunes lawsuit other than winning, because that seems to be what Mr. Biss gets involved in, is all these lawsuits where he's, hoping for an outcome, not necessarily based on the merits, but people can read through these articles, and I'm surprised that someone as highly placed as Devin Nunes would not do some research. I mean, why would he get involved with this guy who's, lost his license and had all these lawsuits dismissed and has been sanctioned by the judge? He's got a Rule 11, motion in the suit against me. He's a disaster.
Well, he's probably his next door neighbor or something like that. By the way, McFadden, the judge that I have in the antitrust case, is in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Apparently lives in Alexandria, Virginia, as does, Bliss and as does Nunes. But in any event...
Oh, right, sorry. He lives in Virginia. I thought he was...
He lives in Virginia. I guess you're looking at Wikipedia there. But, Jason, I mean, this is the legal system, and it's unfortunate that there's a confluence here between a corrupt law passed by Congress, where congressmen and senators had their pockets lined by these social media companies, and the ability to reach this kind of conduct, to have to be creative through the antitrust law. It shouldn't be that way. There should be a claim for defamation. There should be a claim for negligence, as Nunes brought. But unfortunately, under the current law, there's not. And consequently, I hope that they'll join our case. Here's another thing, is that the Trump Justice Department, when Sessions was there, was creating a false impression that he had a group that was studying whether there were antitrust violations by these social media companies. Nothing ever happened, typical of Sessions. Where's the current Attorney General, who comes out with, elderly fraud, 2 weeks ago, but we really haven't seen much of anything that he's done since then? And, why isn't he having the antitrust division start an investigation into these matters? He can start both a criminal grand jury proceeding, but even before he gets to that, he can send out what's called civil investigative demands to ask for documents to see if these companies are colluding. Where's the Justice Department? So, we've talked about this before. William Barr is an establishment Republican hack. He was put in there at the recommendation of the likes of Matt Schlapp of ACU, of the Federalist Society, of all the lobbyists in Washington, D.C., who want their guy in power. Why hasn't he ordered an antitrust investigation? So why does Devin Nunes have to go and file a complaint in Virginia, on these very specious legal grounds? Why isn't our Justice Department, of which I was a proud alumnus at one time, in the antitrust division, why aren't they conducting an investigation of this at a minimum?
Well, why doesn't Trump tell him to do it?
It's beyond imagination. I wish the president would stop tweeting so much and actually, take some strong actions here. I mean, I love the president. I'm not knocking him. I understand why he feels reactive. But he has the power. He technically is the head of the Justice Department. He's the chief law enforcement officer. And he can say, without predetermining the outcome, I'm asking my attorney general to order an investigation into the social media companies.
Yeah.
So,
My fear again with this Stephen Biss, Devin Nunes lawsuit is that it brings an air of ridiculousness by suing Devin Nunes' cow. This guy has sued Queen Tut. I'm waiting for him to sue Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Spider-Man. But there was this article in the Richmond Times Dispatch from February of 2018. Again, Biss is, having a multi-million-dollar suit dismissed. This guy's the king of. He should change his name from Biss to Dismiss, because that seems to be his middle name.
In Brussels they have a little statue called the Mannequin Piss. Maybe they can call it.
Change his name to that.
Yeah,
but
it's
basically
urinating. I mean, maybe that's where we're going here. I'm being a little bit vulgar here, just for a little humor, but it's not a serious case. No, it's not.
But this guy seems to have a pattern and practice of bringing multi-million-dollar defamation suits, making all kinds of, accusations, and going nowhere with these things. And he's just suing one person after the next for defamation, losing every suit.
This reminds me of another public official, Rand Paul, who, basically pulled a stunt like this. When I sued the NSA, and I had 3 cases. One was a class action as well for the illegal mass surveillance under President Obama, which succeeded in getting 2 preliminary injunctions. Judge Leon ruled that this was a constitutional violation of the 4th Amendment. Rand Paul comes behind me, and files a class action. He claims that he was the first one to file the class action, which was a total lie. And I invited him. I saw him on the mall at a demonstration. I said, Senator Paul, I always have an open mind. Let's work together. You've got your case, I've got mine. We can even consolidate them. Never heard from the guy. And in fact, he never did anything to push the case forward. It was just for politics. It was just for show. It wasn't for dough. And that's probably the case with Nunes' lawsuit as well. That's what they do. They file these cases, and they raise money off those cases for their next congressional campaign. Nunes narrowly won his last one, so it's filling his coffers. And that's what it's about. And, of course, it's promotion for the lawyer.
Right. Well, I mean, we know from Robert David Steele's lawsuit that Mr. Biss is doing that on contingency for Robert David Steele. I would presume he's doing something similar for Devin Nunes, because obviously it's a high-profile case. He was mentioned on Fox. It's a little strange to me, Larry. I mean, the thing is basically being universally derided. Devin Nunes sues Twitter for allowing accounts to insult him. Devin Nunes' ludicrous $250 million lawsuit. Devin Nunes is having a cow. So many different news outlets have been totally insulting Devin Nunes to the extent that I wonder if this isn't a Trojan horse attack on Nunes himself.
Well, you know what? I mean, you may be right, Jason, but if it was the greatest case in the world, you would find the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Rolling Stone, Daily Caller, which really isn't conservative at all. It's a front organization for anti-Trumpers run by Tucker Carlson, frankly, and others. You would find those people insulting the case in any event. But, you're fundamentally right. The case has little to no legal merit.
Can you sue people for hurtful words?
Can you sue them for words?
Hurtful words, yeah.
Well, if it's opinion, that's protected. But if they're saying false facts, or if it's a mixed question of law and fact, that can be actionable as defamation. And if you accuse people of crimes, as occurred with Nunes, that's called defamation per se,
right?
Where damages are actually presumed. And I brought a number of defamation cases lately with regard to Jerry Corsi's being defamed by Roger Stone. I brought one for myself. I was defamed by Roger Stone. Surrogates of Roger Stone at his direction were defaming me. You have to fight back, but this one's not going to work. I mean, if you want to sue the people, which they did, who did the defamation.
Devin Nunes' mom, Devin Nunes' cow.
Yeah, these are fictional. They're not actually his mom or his cow.
Oh, I know, but it's ridiculous to have that in a lawsuit, isn't it?
Yeah, because Devin Nunes apparently came from a ranching family in California. But you can sue them, but the case against Twitter is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. I agree. And I mean, does this lawsuit even stand any hope of forcing Twitter to reveal who is behind Devin Nunes' mom and Devin Nunes' cow?
If it goes forward, it could. Now, the case can go forward against these individuals based upon what they posted. I mean, it was pretty bad. I agree with that. But Twitter's likely to be dismissed out. Now, the question is, will they throw the baby out with the bathwater? Now, depending on who you get as a judge here, I would suspect the odds are this judge is not going to want the hot potato in his courtroom either, no more than McFadden did. And that's the reality of life today in the judiciary. They're generally gutless people. There's one judge in the District of Columbia that, Judge Royce Lamberth, who has courage that I know of. Maybe there's some others now that, come on the bench. Judge Sullivan, who's a Democrat, has some courage from time to time, and he's a good man. But there aren't many like that. And when you get these very high-profile cases, if you're not a big mega company that basically lines the pockets of the politicians, you're at a significant disadvantage. And these judges tend to dismiss the cases. They don't want to hear them.
Yeah.
Last time I saw Emmett Sullivan presiding over a case was General Flynn. Now, we heard after Paul Manafort was sentenced that General Flynn's cooperation with the Department of Justice was over. Have you heard anything about that? Will Emmett Sullivan have another hearing to determine what's going to happen to Michael Flynn?
I don't know the date right now. I mean, it's out there. You can Google it. But yes, there's going to be another hearing. And I understand why Judge Sullivan reacted the way he did. We talked about that, is that General Flynn's lawyers were playing him for a fool, and he took personal offense. I mean, he should have stepped back a little bit and not reacted. But, people are human, and so are judges. But, they have his client Flynn plead out, and then they say, well, we don't think that he should have pled out, that, in fact, his Miranda rights weren't read to him. You can't have it both ways. It's talking out of both sides of your mouth. And that's why Sullivan erupted against Manafort and his lawyers. Against Flynn and his lawyers.
Right, right. And I'm glad you brought that up, that judges are people and they don't want to look like fools. So in the case of your class action suit against Twitter that's been dismissed without prejudice by Trevor McFadden, he didn't want to look like a fool. How likely is it that a judge that gets a lawsuit that's suing Devin Nunes' cow and is making allegations and leveling complaints that legal experts across the spectrum are calling ludicrous and ridiculous, how likely is it that any judge is going to want to get on board with this rather than just push it out and get rid of it?
Not likely, but if by the grace of God, again, they got a judge who's a conservative judge, who has a little guts, he may take a risk and let it go forward, at least with regard to Devin Nunes' cow and Devin Nunes' mom, but not Twitter.
Yeah.
But this is what you're dealing with today. And I might say this, people think I'm very critical of judges. That's why I started Judicial Watch. You can read about it at freedomwatchusa.org, my bio. You can get my book. It's on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Horrors, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. But I honestly believe the judges are our most important public servants, Jason.
Yeah.
But we don't get the best and the brightest. We get politicians in robes.
Well,
and, we have a catalog of a legal system, but we've got drunken drivers at the wheel, and that's the problem. Because they're there to protect us from the tyranny of the other branches of government and from ourselves, and instead they're scratching their own backs.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Larry, when I read legal complaints that are upset about Devin Nunes' cow and Devin Nunes' mom, and then I consider that judges started out as lawyers, I think we're not getting the best lawyers in most cases as well. So it's, this is a real problem because there are matters that people want relief, they want to rely on the courts, and when people like Stephen Biss are repeatedly issuing these lawsuits that are just getting dismissed, and he's getting sanctioned, and he's getting yelled at by Judge Williams in the Southern District of New York. This is a guy who's really just abusing the legal system, wasting resources, preventing legitimate cases from being heard, right? I mean, what can be done about lawyers like this who just repeatedly abuse the system?
Well, the way it works, if you're a leftist lawyer, you can pretty much do whatever you want because the bar associations are controlled by people that are generally in the left. That's particularly true in the District of Columbia and Maryland and other places. I'll give you an example. Kellyanne Conway was subject to an ethics complaints filed by 16 law professors because she made a comment on Fox News that they didn't consider to be accurate. David Kendall, another leftist, Williams and Conley, helped Hillary Clinton destroy 33,000 emails and obstructed justice. Nothing happens to them. But if you're a conservative lawyer, you got a good chance of being strung up on a tree. But generally speaking, the bar associations and the disciplinary council are supposed to deal with these matters. So they can. I mean, if the guy's done something unethical, I mean, and these disciplinary councils play it straight, they can look at it and take appropriate action. But, as far as judges are concerned, there's no constraint on them. They police themselves. And when you file a complaint against a judge, it goes to his or her buddies in the courthouse, and they basically throw the complaint in the trash. So God only knows what's going to happen in this particular case.
So what do you think is next for the class action suit that you've got going against the social media companies? When will you refile, and where does that go?
I'm going to refile it in the next few weeks. We're going to beef up the facts in that. I mean, they were sufficient. They were more than sufficient. You can find the complaint at freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions. We need to get bigger. We're starting our citizens' grand juries this month. And, we are going to proceed ahead, and we're going to put it right back in front of Judge McFadden, or we'll file it in another venue, perhaps a more favorable venue, which is legitimate, not forum shopping, but legitimate. And we'll, put forward something that cannot be voluntarily dismissed. But if you look at our complaint, again, go at freedomwatchusa.org. It's exceedingly well documented in terms of fact and law. In fact, before I even filed it, I had been retained by another interest that had been discriminating against. They decided not to file a case. But a lot of the research that we did was done with regard to this other client. And we spent a lot of time. It was very scholarly. And you have to read the complaint to understand what it's all about. But the antitrust laws are the way that it needs to be dealt with, because this is a restraint of trade and it is an abuse of a dominant position. That's what the European Union, I worked for the European Union competition director as a young lawyer too. They copied our antitrust laws by and large after World War II because of concentration. The idea was not to let industrialists get too concentrated. That's what Hitler did, and he was able to use that industrial concentration to work his evil deeds in Germany and to seize control of Germany. So antitrust law is very, very important. I believe in it. I'm free trade. Many of the things that I did at Judicial Watch and do at Freedom Watch is based upon allowing for competition. And this is the vehicle that needs to be used. And I would hope that we would find a judge that will sustain the case, let it go forward, because you can bet what we'll find in the files of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest of them. You can imagine how they're communicating with each other and internally. And I guarantee, I'll bet the bank that they are colluding, conspiring, agreeing to restrain trade. There's no doubt about it. And they all live in the same place. They live in Silicon Valley. They all go out to dinner with each other. They get drinks.
Wow.
They're all, super leftists. They're
sit
cool.
on the boards of each other's companies and all that kind of thing. So, Larry, Josh Hawley is a senator who has been calling out these big tech companies for what he claims, as I've said, is a really inappropriate application of this Section 230 of the Decency and Communications Act. I don't know, all these ad-driven websites are really difficult to navigate through. But so he's the only senator who I've seen talking about this. He's talking about the Communications Decency Act and trust-busting President Teddy Roosevelt. So here's a senator who is aware of this matter, and it's being reported there in McClatchy. But we've got The Verge telling us that somehow Mr. Hawley is not properly understanding this?
No, he is. I mean, it looks like he gets it. Okay, it's an antitrust issue. Let me tell you a funny story here, just to amuse people, is that people should go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org, go to Freedom Watch YouTube, see the radio interview I did with my client Laurie Loon last week, showing that the current CEO of Fox News, Suzanne Scott, was an enabler and actually helped further the sexual abuse of Roger Ailes against not just my client, Laurie Loon, but many other women.
Larry, where on the website can people access your YouTube videos? Right here?
Freedom Watch YouTube.
Got it. So
Yeah.
you just click
So
on YouTube.
I want you to watch that, because this will tell you about Fox News. It's not just Tucker Carlson making, disgusting remarks about women and they're not doing anything about it, which is consistent with their culture over at Fox News. It's not just about throwing Judge Jeanine off the air because she hypothesized that maybe Ilham Omar might follow Sharia law since she wears a kebab or whatever it is.
Hijab.
Hijab, okay. It's not just, putting Paul Ryan on the board of directors of Fox now that they sold most of the assets, the Murdochs, to Disney. He's now on Fox of directors. It's not just hiring Donna Brazile, who's a criminal, who actually subverted the debates, by feeding questions to Hillary Clinton from CNN. But this network is so vile, it's so evil, it disrespects women, it covers it up, and the current CEO of Fox, Suzanne Scott, along with Bill Shine, covered it up when my client was going through, a near life-threatening time of her life. She tried to commit suicide twice because of how Ailes was abusing her sexually and mentally and otherwise. Well, okay, so today, believe it or not, I get a call. I've been blacklisted by Fox ever since Ailes was chairman, from a booker on Fox and Friends. This is Rich. And she says to me, would you like to come on Fox and Friends and talk about the Nunes' lawsuit and your lawsuit? So I was just kind of playing along.
Wasn't Laurie Loon a booker at Fox News?
She was a booker. She was the head booker. Then she rose higher than that. But so I said, well, when would you like me to come on? I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. Well, 4:30 in the morning, okay? So 4:30, which is 1:30 Pacific time. I'm on the West Coast this week. So it was a joke. What they basically were doing was trying to placate me. They were trying to bribe me, but they didn't want to get me to back off of my criticism and legal actions concerning Fox News.
Right.
But I said, I'm not going on 4:30 in the morning. Are you kidding me? Nobody's watching. I was joking. I said, but now I know that the blacklist is continuing. And the booker was a very nice young woman, so I wasn't disrespectful to her. But I wanted her to know, and I said, go watch the video of Laurie Loon, and you'll see how women at your network have been treated and how they continue to be treated. And the fact that Jeanine Pirro gets thrown off the air, but Tucker Carlson, they don't even criticize him for using the C word about women and other disgusting things. I don't care how long ago it was. Tells you what Fox News is all about. And they're self-destructing. People are seeing it. Donna Brazile, Paul Ryan, Napolitano's become anti-Trump. Chris Wallace goes after Trump every week. They play both sides of the street. The Murdoch brothers are leftists. They're now in control. And the network is, I think, it's on the verge of going under. And frankly, I hope it does go under, because we need competition among conservative networks. We need to boost up the One America Newses, the Newsmaxes, the others. We need a real conservative network, not Fox, which is phony.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that multiple small independent news outlets is a better way to go. Larry, one of our commenters was saying that what Judge Jeanine said was bigoted and shameful. I don't think I agree with that. I think the judge was raising an important point that, when we've got a member of Congress who is, working with and supporting people who are known jihadis, and she herself has taken an oath on the Quran, which, as you and I and Laura have explored, is instructing its followers to lie to people who are not followers of the Quran. And she goes around accusing Jewish members of Congress and Jewish American citizens of having dual loyalties. I think she is someone who needs to be questioned and scrutinized. I question where her loyalty lies.
That's right. Remember that Jeanine Pirro is a Coptic Egyptian Christian. Okay, so she understands the persecution from the Muslims in Egypt. Okay, and her family escaped that. So for her simply to say, it's to wear that kind of headdress, I always mispronounce that, I don't mean they disrespect, but to wear that may mean that she believes in Sharia law, which is antithetical to the Constitution. Sharia law, believes in obeying Allah, not the Constitution. It believes in persecuting gays, lesbians, transgenders.
Treating women like property.
Infidels are to be either killed or enslaved, and then heavily taxed. That's a legitimate question. And when Ilham Omar took her oath, she took it on the Quran. She didn't take it on the Bible. So you can raise the question. She just simply raised the question. Now, Fox, which had been owned by Saudi interests in part, that explains why during the Obama years you could never say that he was half Muslim. You could never say that he was favoring the Arab interests over there and Iran and others because of his Muslim roots. You couldn't say that. You would have been booted off of Fox, just like you could never talk about the birth certificate, or you could never talk about Vince Foster, how he died. It's a phony operation. Yeah, we need more competition, Jason, whether it's people like you and me and what I say in my radio show, Radio America, and others, but we also need another major cable network, or at least two, maybe Sinclair. Here's the thing about Trump. Let me say this. I love the president, but it's clear that his people on the FCC killed the merger of Sinclair with a lot of other stations because they wanted to challenge Fox. Because at the time, the president thought Fox had his back. Well, he no longer thinks that. In the last few days, you're seeing tweets from him and from his son, which are criticizing Fox. And it looks like they've turned against him. He's turning against Fox. And that's probably a good thing that he's turning against it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never been too impressed with Fox. In my view, they're just another one of these corporate-owned, billionaire-owned, billionaire advertiser-driven news outlets. And part of the reason I created Crowdsource the Truth, Larry, is because I think that model is broken. Obviously, those billionaires care more about providing news that services the interests of their multi-million-dollar advertising contracts than the individual viewers who are watching. I really stand by this business model of having thousands of micro sponsors, and hopefully one day more than thousands, but micro sponsors, everybody paying a small amount so that there's no undue financial influence over the reporting. The last thing I want to touch on, because we are running out of time here, I want to come back to this Josh Hawley and his activities where he's speaking out against this DCA 230. Now, The Verge, which I've heard of but don't know that much about in terms of its political leanings, they're saying that Republicans keep misunderstanding the law that protects internet platforms. I haven't read this article, but I feel like from the title, it's got to be incorrect, because this law was designed to protect internet service providers, not social media networks. And in fact, in 1996, social media did not even exist as a consumer product or a widely used sort of a thing. So this is something for people to read. But what do you think about what Josh Hawley is planning to do?
I think it's a good thing. And I always have an open mind, and I'm always an optimist. And I hope that someone will emerge in Congress who has some guts, who will do things for the right reasons. I don't know of anybody currently in Congress who will. There's some people that are better than others. There's some people that are pretty bad, but none of them have pure intentions. And, I was saying to you, Jason, I was watching the miniseries John Adams on HBO in the last few nights. I urge everybody to read it, or to watch it again. I've watched it many times, and I've read the book by David McCullough. But there's one scene that struck me, and that was when Adams was sitting around at the First Continental Congress, and they accomplished nothing. He says, I really can't take this anymore. He said, it's just talk. It's no action. Now's the time for us to wage revolution. And he was the first to say that. And we're at that point right now. I'm not asking people to be violent or do things that aren't peaceful, but our Congress is worthless. It's at least in 1776 they finally got it together and rose up, but our Congress has not. And there are some people like that in there that want to do the right thing, but they're smacked down by the others.
Now, this is interesting. So they're talking about the case Stratton Oakmont versus Prodigy. Stratton Oakmont was, I guess, the Wolf of Wall Street firm. And this is saying that it actually was over chat room posts. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or availability of material. I need to read a bit more about this and understand it more. I mean, isn't it frequently the case, Larry, that no matter what this says, there's some way for somebody to figure out how it does or doesn't apply to whatever?
It's like Judge McFadden saying, is your complaint plausible or not? I mean, this is theater of the absurd. It's plausible for one person, is not plausible for another. Okay, so there's no firm basis upon which the law can be enforced. It depends on the whim of the judge.
Well, Larry, we always have a ton to talk about. Is there any updates you can give us with regard to Schaefer Cox or the Bundys or Judge Arpaio or Dr. Corsi or any of the other cases that you and your team at Judicial Watch are presiding over right now?
Well, the Bundys, we don't have a lot of time, but quickly go to freedomwatchusa.org, go to clivenbundydefensefund.org, contribute to that cause. I filed a motion, because the case is proceeding on appeal, to bring the whistleblower before the lower court to open the record, to take his testimony, to get documentation. Larry Wooten, he testified, he came forward as a whistleblower, but was never made part of the record because the case was dismissed before that could happen. Testified that there was a kill list on the heads of the Bundys, that their religion was being disparaged, they were being called retards, subhuman. The prosecutor, Stephen Myray, buried evidence and, in fact, banished this whistleblower to Siberia, in effect. Now, if we can get that testimony, it's all over. I mean, even the appeal is over. So I think we have a very good chance for the Ninth Circuit to open the case up to take that testimony. It's only the fair thing to do. It's a matter of due process. And the Ninth Circuit, people criticize it, but actually when it comes to criminal defendants, and of course that's what the Bundys, were, is that they're more sympathetic to the rights of individuals than some other circuits like the Fourth Circuit or other circuits which, basically scratch the back of the powers to be. The Ninth Circuit does not do that. And that's one of the good parts of the Ninth Circuit.
And of course, contrary to fake news reports, as people saw firsthand when Ryan Bundy came on with you and I just a couple weeks ago, you're still working for the Bundys, with the Bundys, having a good relationship with them and fighting for their freedom.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we love each other. We're like a big family.
Yeah.
And this is the greatest family I've ever had the privilege of representing.
Yeah, and you're doing such important work at Freedom Watch. It's important for everybody who's watching to go to freedomwatchusa.org and financially support Larry and his team. There really are no other lawyers who are bringing cases like this, at least no other competent lawyers that are bringing cases like this and doing it in a way that they actually have an opportunity to succeed. I'm very interested to see what happens with this Devin Nunes case. I don't see it really going anywhere. I think Mr. Biss is frequently abusing the legal system. That's evident just from looking at his track record, the frequency with which these cases are dismissed, and he's been basically reprimanded by judges and the Bar Association. So we'll see what happens to Devin Nunes and his case against Twitter. I have a feeling Twitter's not too worried about it. They haven't released any kind of official statements about it or anything like that. Is Fox saying anything more about it? I don't know, but it sort of went over like a lead balloon.
Yeah, it was all over Fox today. I mean, they need something to sell every day. It's like, fresh fish. But what did Benjamin Franklin say? Guests are like fish. After 3 days, they start to smell. So
I didn't know he said that.
He did. That's one of his famous lines.
He has said a lot of great things. Well, Larry, thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate your insights on this matter. I wish you the best of luck in your class action suit against the social media companies. I agree they're colluding. Alex Jones has alleged the same in separate litigation, and it's scary to see how effective they've been at shutting down some of these dissenting voices, including our friend Laura Loomer, who's part of your class action suit. I hope that you can succeed and reinstate the accounts and the people that are doing so much to fight for freedom in our country. And best of luck to you, Larry. I'll speak to you soon.
Jason. And I urge people to support Crowdsource the Truth and Pantheon and others.
Thank you very much.
It is very important, my good friend.
Thank you. And I'll be back tomorrow with Charles Ortel. He'll be closing in. It's Wednesday, so we'll have more information on what the Clintons and the Obamas and all of those guys have been up to. See everybody then. Thanks. Good night, Larry.
Good night.